There is a particular kind of stillness that settles into a room late at night after the day has finished and the sounds of it have slowly disappeared. You are sitting somewhere in the apartment, perhaps at the kitchen table, perhaps near a window, and the quiet around you is not uncomfortable, not exactly. It is just there, the way rooms are there when no one is moving through them. You have a drink nearby that has gone lukewarm, and you are not quite ready to sleep, and you are not quite doing anything either. You are just present in the room the way a person can be present, without being entirely sure what they are doing there. And then, without any particular reason, a question moves through you. Not a new question, an old one that has been visiting you on and off for years, arriving in different forms, in different rooms, at different hours of the night. It does not announce itself loudly. It does not arrive with urgency or panic. It arrives the way familiar things arrive, quietly, without apology, as if it belongs here with you. The question does not have a clean shape. It is more of a feeling than a sentence. Something about the direction things went. Something about why certain things happened the way they happened. Something about whether the life you are living now is the one that was always coming, or whether things simply accumulated over time until they became this. You do not try to answer it. You have tried before. And sitting there in the lukewarm quiet, you notice something you have not quite named before, that you are no longer expecting an answer to arrive. That feeling of waiting for an answer that never quite comes has a long history in ordinary life. It does not live only in the late-night quiet. It travels with you during the day, in the gaps between tasks. You are standing in line at a shop, or watching the minutes pass at a desk, or driving a road you have driven many times, and something inside you is running a thread that you are not fully aware of. A quiet accounting, a kind of background process that the visible hours of your life sit on top of. You ask yourself, not dramatically, not even in words sometimes, why did things go the way they went? Why did that relationship find its end where it did? Why did a version of your life that felt possible for so long simply stop being possible? Why certain friendships faded even when neither person intended them to? Why some things that felt important when you were younger no longer feel the same? These are not questions you would describe as painful exactly. They are more like weather, present without being an emergency, part of the atmosphere of the days. You have carried them long enough that they feel almost ordinary. Almost. And yet something in you still believes, on some quiet level, that understanding will come eventually, that one day the shape of things will clarify, that there will be a moment of recognition, something will happen, or someone will say something, and you will finally understand why your life moved the way it moved, why the losses arrived when they did, why certain doors closed at the precise moment they did. You have been waiting for that moment without knowing you were waiting. You have been keeping a small space open, somewhere beneath the surface of the daily routine, for an explanation to arrive. And for most of your life, that open space felt reasonable. It felt like patience, or faith, or simply the natural state of a person who has not yet reached the end of their story. But lately, something has been shifting, slowly, quietly, without anything dramatic to mark the moment. The open space has not exactly closed, but you have stopped checking it as often, and something in that, something in the stopping, has begun to feel less like defeat and more like something else you have not fully named. And that something, that unnamed feeling that comes from no longer checking, begins to reveal itself slowly, the way things only become clear when you stop pressing toward them. There is a version of not knowing that feels like incompleteness, like a sentence that has not finished, like standing outside a locked room and wondering what is inside. That version of not knowing carries weight. It creates a kind of restlessness that goes with you through the days, a low hum of unresolution that sits just beneath everything else. You have lived with that version for a long time, but there is another version of not knowing, quieter, older, more settled, a version that does not ask for the door to open, that has stopped pacing in front of it, that has begun, slowly, to find ways to live in the hallway. And what you notice, sitting in that apartment with the lukewarm drink and the night pressing softly against the windows, is that you may be moving, have perhaps already moved, from the first version into the second. Not because the questions have been answered, not because you have found peace or arrived anywhere particular, but because the questions themselves have changed their shape in your hands. They are the same questions, but they feel different now. Less like problems, more like weather. Less like something waiting to be solved. More like something that simply belongs to the life you have actually lived, rather than the versions of it that might have been. That is a strange thing to notice, because it does not feel like giving up. It does not feel like despair or resignation or the closing down of something vital. It feels, if anything, like a different kind of attention, a willingness to sit with things the way you sit with an old building that has cracks in the walls. You do not expect the building to become new, but you can still live inside it. You can still find it comfortable. You can still call it yours. And calling it yours, learning to call something yours, even when it is not fully understood, is one of the quieter forms of growing that happens in adulthood without any announcement. There is a story that people tell about growth, and it involves clarity. It involves arriving at understanding. It involves a moment where things that were once confusing become visible, where the larger pattern of a life comes into focus and makes sense in a way that earlier years did not. That is a real thing. It happens. But there is another kind of growing that does not work that way, and it receives far less attention. It does not involve clarity. It involves something closer to accommodation, to learning to live alongside things that will not become clear, to giving up, gently, without grief, the expectation that understanding is coming. Not because you have stopped caring, but because you have been alive long enough to observe that some things do not resolve, that some questions are not structured the way questions are supposed to be. They do not have an answer sitting somewhere downstream, waiting for you to arrive at it. They are questions that exist because life is the kind of thing that generates more questions than answers, and the ratio does not improve with time. It shifts. You learn to carry more at once, but it does not simplify. And something about accepting this, really accepting it, not as a philosophy, but as a lived experience, as a bodily knowledge that has accumulated without you choosing it, changes the texture of a day. Not dramatically, not in a way you would easily describe if someone asked. But there are moments in an ordinary day when you catch it. A small absence where something heavy used to be. A lightness you cannot quite explain, because what you have set down is not a burden in any conventional sense. It was just a waiting a quiet, sustained, barely conscious, waiting for the question to finally find its answer. And when you stop waiting, when you realize, not dramatically, but simply, that the waiting has ended, the days feel slightly different. Not emptier, not sadder, just different. As if a background frequency you had grown so accustomed to that you stopped hearing it has simply gone quiet. And in the silence it leaves behind, other things can be heard, smaller things. The sound of what is actually here, rather than what was once hoped for or expected. You notice the light in a room differently. You sit in an afternoon differently. You carry the unanswered questions the way you carry other old things, without urgency, without impatience, with a kind of worn familiarity that has its own comfort. There are people who have loved you and left. There are choices that went the way they went. There are roads that ended before you expected them to. There are versions of yourself you once imagined and then quietly let go of, not in a single moment, but over a long stretch of ordinary time. And you do not understand fully why any of it happened the way it did. You may never understand. And sitting there in the late night quiet, you realize that the not understanding has shifted. It is still there. It is still real. But it is no longer shaped like a wound. It is shaped more now like a room you have learned to live in. A room with its own particular light, its own particular quiet. Not the room you would have chosen, perhaps, but a room that is yours. The drink on the table has gone fully cold now. The room is the same room it was an hour ago. Nothing has changed in any visible way. The walls, the window, the low sound of the city or the street, whatever version of outside exists beyond the glass. And yet something in you has settled that was not settled before, not resolved, not answered. Settled the way sediment settles, slowly, without drama, as the motion above it finally quiets. You will go to sleep soon. Tomorrow there will be a day to move through, ordinary in the way days are, full of the same routines and small requirements that days carry. And the questions will still be there. They always are. But they will feel, in the morning, like what they have become, not weights so much as companions, old ones. The kind you have learned not to interrogate at every hour. The kind that simply travel alongside you through all the regular hours of a regular life, neither fully answered nor fully set aside. That is not nothing. Sitting quietly in the room, with the cold drink and the quiet pressing in from outside, that is not nothing at all.